Do you have a thirst to learn about wine? Do you love stories about wonderfully obsessive people, hauntingly beautiful places, and amusingly awkward social situations? Well, that's the blend here on the Unreserved Wine Talk podcast. I'm your host, Natalie McLean, and each week I share with you unfiltered conversations with celebrities in the wine world, as well as confessions from my own tipsy journey as I write my third book on this subject. I'm so glad you're here. Now pass me that bottle, please, and let's get started. Welcome to episode 11. Before we get started, I want to give a shout out to Encaustic Art for her review on Apple Podcasts. Quote, "If you're looking for a good source of wine information, your best bet is to follow Natalie. These podcasts are filled with interesting experiences. She's easy to listen to, and I also like the idea of bringing in other experts from the wine world." She signs off her review with, "Happily unreserved." Thank you so much for that. I really do appreciate you taking the time to post it. Now, I'm going to continue to give a shout out to others who've been kind enough to leave a review. So if you want me to mention your website or your social media handle so others can find you online, please do include that in your review as well, along with your name. Now, back to this episode. We're chatting with Katie Bell, wine columnist for Forbes magazine. This is a fascinating chat in which she tells the story about how the vineyard of the world's most expensive wine was held hostage for ransom, why she's skeptical about the latest health and wine study results, and whether she thinks that U.S. critic Robert Parker Jr. can make or break a winery. Enjoy. Have you ever wondered what it would be like to taste the world's best wine? And which wine is it, more importantly? Well, we're going to explore that topic and a whole lot more with our guest. Our guest this evening has been writing about wine for the past 12 years for Forbes, USA Today, Modern Luxury, Decanter, and Southern Living magazine. She has traveled from the vineyards of Argentina to the press houses of Champagne. You can also find her on the CNN Airport Channel as a travel expert and on WSB Atlanta radio talking about wine. Originally from St. Louis, Missouri, she holds a bachelor's degree in art history and a master's degree in education from Vanderbilt University. She also has her WSET intermediate level certificate and lives in Atlanta with her 3 kids, 1 dog, and 1 very patient husband, she says. Welcome, Katie Bell. Hello.
Hi, glad to be here.
Glad to have you here. This is going to be a great chat, Katie. And you are a world traveler. Where are you back from just recently?
Recently back from Torino, so the western part of northern Italy, which was a lot of fun. I was there with Martini and Rossi. They had some new sparkling wines that they're getting ready to debut. So we got to go talk sparkling for a couple days. It was a lot of fun.
Oh, wow. Wow. I'm sure there's lots of folks who wish they had your job. This is great. We were talking most recently about another trip you made to Champagne, right?
Yes.
What was special about that? What was different about that trip?
That trip was an incredible experience. I went to Champagne with Isaiah Thomas, who is an NBA Hall of Famer. He played for the Detroit Pistons, won the national championship. And Isaiah is contemporary with Magic Johnson, an incredible athlete. And he is now making champagne in the Aube region of Champagne. This is a passion project for him. He's very excited about bringing what he considers to be a lower sugar champagne and less sulfite offering to the United States. So I was his first sort of press guest, and we picked grapes together. We threw the basket. Well, he threw the basketball and I didn't catch it. So it was an interesting trip for sure. And what a great guy, a really incredible guy.
What sparked his interest in wine?
He says the first time he tasted it was when they dumped it on his head after they won the championship.
Okay.
He started enjoying it with meals and kind of got introduced to it that way. And then this company, Sherlon Champagne, is the company that approached him and said, "We want to bring our champagne to America. We know you're an entrepreneur. Do you want to partner with us?"
Oh,
So
wow.
he went over there and met with them, loved the family, and said, you know, I want to buy the rights to your grapes and we're going to bottle some champagnes. I'm going to set up my own import business and we're going to do this.
Oh, wow. That's
Very
great.
much a doer. And the Sherlons and Isaiah are a tremendous team. It was a lot of fun to watch them.
Huh, fantastic.
Yeah,
Wow. Okay, so you've been a globetrotter yourself, not to play on the basketball thing there. Anyway,
totally.
unintended.
Well played.
Ah,
That was good.
oh dear. But in your travels, you've met some very famous people in the world of wine. Tell me about your trip to taste the world's best wine. Where were you going and what got you intrigued about going there?
Well, Domaine Romani Conti is a wine I have read about and fantasized about. As a wine writer, it's a bucket list wine. It's absolutely the wine anyone who cares about wine wants to try. It's not in my budget. It's about $12,000 a bottle.
Oh, wow.
So, through a press contact, I was able to get a letter of recommendation to visit the domain in Burgundy in April. We set that up probably in January or February, planned the thing out way in advance. I was extremely nervous about going because to me, this is the pinnacle of wine. I didn't want to ask stupid questions. I didn't want to drop my wine glass in the cellar. There were so many anxieties I had about it. And of course, the prelude to the trip was nightmarish because Air France canceled my flight because of strikes.
Oh,
The
no.
train to Beaune was canceled because of strikes. The actual flight that I got on to France was delayed almost 5 hours. So I missed the connection when I got to Paris. At some point, I thought karma is telling me, you don't deserve to taste this wine. Just stay home. And I was actually traveling with my son who was just turned 19, and I really wanted it. They told me I could bring a guest. I said, you know what? This is an experience you'll never forget. You're going to come. And
That's
he's the one who
amazing.
said, Mom, you just need to relax and enjoy this.
Yeah,
And, you know, it was
absolutely.
best advice. When we got to Aubert de Belaine's door and the
Hmm.
doorway of the domain, truly by that time, I was mildly hysterical with all the delays and the things that had gone wrong. But he was so gentle and welcoming and humble and kind and marvelous, like the ultimate grandfather you could ever imagine. Just welcomed us in, and we went to the cellar, and he was fussing about he had to have a security code on his cellar. So he's typing in this long code and he's rolling his eyes and he's like, oh, the insurance company makes me do this because the cellar is priceless,
It
the
must
most
be worth
valuable cellar in the
millions.
world, I'm sure.
Wow. You were saying in your story, how much did the most recent vintage go for?
From my research online, around $12,000 a bottle.
Wow.
Of course, you don't buy Domaine della Romani Conti, it comes to you. Usually somebody says, I have a bottle, and then you say, yes, of course I want it. There's so little of it made.
Yeah.
It's truly one of the rarest wines, which of course increases the demand. Scarcity of something exceptional is hard to beat. So yeah, the
Wow.
prices are stratospheric.
That's amazing. And was the vineyard held ransom at some point?
Before I went, I must have read every article I could read. And one of the most fascinating stories was 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Somebody based in Epernay, a Frenchman, traveled down to Beaune. He sort of had a criminal past, and he snuck into the vineyard at night and injected two of the vines at the base of the vine with pesticide and poison.
Oh, wow.
Then a few weeks later, he sent a letter to Aubert de Villaine, and the letter basically had a map of the vineyard, and he circled the two vines that he'd poisoned. He said, I've poisoned two of your vines. If you don't pay me €1 million, I'm going to poison the rest, or I'm going to make it public that your vineyard is poisoned.
Oh, wow.
Obviously, you're trying to protect your vaunted reputation.
Yeah.
So if you don't give me €1 million, then game is over.
That is amazing.
So David Lane, of course, is not concerned about his reputation. He's outlived people like this. And so he contacted the investigators and they determined what they were going to do. They made fake euros. And the guy said, I want you to put my €1 million in the cemetery nearby
Huh.
and leave them there. So, of course, they put the million fake euros in the cemetery and staged police officers throughout the region. And he walked by and picked it up and kept going. And they nabbed him not long after. And he said, yeah, I just got out of prison and I figured this was a way to make some money.
But he must have had some wine knowledge knowing to target that, not, $2 Chuck.
Absolutely. And he clearly knew the vineyard. I mean, he was super brilliant up until the point where he asked for the money to be dropped right down the street in the cemetery.
Okay.
Fascinating story. Yeah.
Absolutely. So let's keep talking about DRC because it's got such a reputation. Apart from meticulous winemaking, why do you think it is such a phenomenal wine?
That's actually a great question. And I asked Aubert that question. And the answer he gave me, essentially, the vineyard itself is sort of at the center of a constellation of Burgundy's best vineyard. So Romani Conti vineyard is the vineyard that sort of enjoys the superlatives of all the other vineyards around it. So
Okay.
it's the soil, it's the way the vines are facing, it's the microorganisms, the yeast, and what that's growing right there. All those things come together on those particular vines, and the hillside slopes in just one specific kind of way. And it isn't that David Lane discovered this. I mean, the monks were there in the 13th century and they figured out this is the best place to grow Pinot Noir.
Wow.
It's been something that obviously showed its quality well before we ever got here.
Huh.
And David Lane and that family, they've farmed it biodynamically, so they've cared for it in the best possible way. And it really is the expression of the ultimate of what Burgundy is.
Right. Ah, awesome. And the monks, as you say, had been working the land since thousands of years ago,
Yeah.
but also that the architecture of that soil must be magnificent with the old vines and the limestone and everything else. It must be just a treasure. Develaine or Aubert said to you something like there's more, was it caves
Oh,
underground than houses above ground or
he said
something like that?
Burgundy is like an iceberg. There's
Okay.
more underneath than on top. So underneath is, of course, all the soil and the terroir, but it's also all the
Sure.
caves.
Yes.
That's what they do in Burgundy. They vinify and then they store it in these incredibly black mold encrusted caves. I'm sure that the Center for Disease Control would have a field day what's going on in those caves.
Yeah.
That humidity and that aspect, it imparts something into the wine that no other part of the world can do.
Wow, that is fantastic. And why do you think Burgundy is so complex? How is it different, say, from Bordeaux? Why is Burgundy so confusing?
Burgundy has well over 1,000 climats, which they describe as a single plot that has its own distinct taste. So it's not just soil, it's soil, climate, and then it's the person who's working with the vines. So I think they have something like 1,450 or whatever individual climats, and every single one expresses differently. That alone makes Burgundy overwhelming, but it also makes it very dazzling because then you have this opportunity. You'll never know it all. It was Jefferson's favorite region.
Oh, is it?
I think for an intellectual, that's probably a really exciting thing. There's so many things that you'll never know about Burgundy.
Right,
I mean, you have
right.
to spend a lifetime there to get it right.
And that's okay.
I'm happy to try all the Burgundy in the world, and I'm sure I won't get it all right. And again, one Burgundy will taste completely different than another one. And it's not always what you like, but it's part of the learning curve.
It's
It's an
true.
incredible place.
And wines that I found just steps away, made from vines that are a few feet away, can taste vastly different.
Yeah, which is extraordinary.
It is extraordinary. And the other thing that I had been talking about with my wine course students is that whereas in Bordeaux, they maintain primogeniture. So the first son got all the land. So you get these big estates and the grand chateau. As you know, in Burgundy, they adopted the Napoleonic Code in about 1804 ish. So it started getting divided up among all the heirs. Clos de Vougeot, you've heard this, I'm sure, has 80 owners. One vineyard has 80 owners. It's insane. They're all entitled to put it on the label. And, some of them just own a few vines. It's
And they
crazy.
do what they want with those vines. They treat
Yeah.
all of them treated differently.
Yes, absolutely. Magnificent. I love this quote from your story. You said, Painter Salvador Dali said, Romani Conti does not make you talk. It is a wine of silence. It has said it all. That said, you and I are wine writers. So how would you describe Domaine Romani Conti when you tasted it?
When I was writing that story, that was the hardest thing to do.
Mm.
It's like asking someone to describe your child in one sentence.
Hmm.
It was so voluptuous, but so polished and delightful. And there was spice and earth and tea and everything that I just find captivating in a wine was there. And when we were drinking this in the cellar, Aubert took the first sip and I watched him. He closed his eyes and then he tasted it. And I thought, yeah, that's exactly what you have to do. You have to close your eyes and you have to be only tasting that wine. It's
Yes,
just an extraordinary thing. I mean, I know it's just a sip of wine, but it's a sip of the most amazing wine.
it is. It truly is. What a lucky thing to have visited the
Oh, for
domain.
sure.
Absolutely. So, looking at some of your stories from your column in Forbes, I mean, there was just so much to choose from. You've covered such great stories, Katie. Let's do a complete turn of topic right now and go to health. You wrote about moderation and it was one of your most popular columns online. How many views or hits did that get?
Last check, it was well over 1 million.
A million. Oh my goodness. Great. And why do you think that topic has such resonance with people?
When I wrote that story, it was a question I personally had. How much wine can I have and still be healthful? I started asking my friends, what are you hearing? And every answer I got was different. And I thought, I need to write a story on this. I need to research this and I need to dig around and see what the answer is. And of course,
Right.
I found out that the answer varies completely from where you live to whether you're a male or a female to what age you are. It was incredible. So I think that story for me was one that I personally needed to find an answer to. And it was a little frustrating because I just kept getting different responses, and every country has different standards for drinking. And to me, there is zero uniformity when it comes
No.
to consumption.
How widely did that vary? Who was the most strict and who was the most liberal in terms of the countries with their guidelines for moderation?
I found this fascinating document that listed every country and what the guidelines were. Of course, the United States is 1 for women per day and 2 for men. In the Basque region of Spain, which is where we probably all like to live, it's 7 a day for everyone. Everybody gets 7. So why not? I'd read this a year ago, 2 years ago. So these probably have already changed 5 times since the time I reported. Australia was like women could have 4, men could have 5. The
Wow.
UK's were a little bit higher than ours, but not much.
Okay.
France was pretty generous. Some made distinctions between men and women, some did not,
Huh.
which I
Interesting.
thought was deeply frustrating, though, because
Yeah.
how is it okay in one country, but then it's not in the other? Like, who's telling the truth here?
And is it dependent on the wine culture? Was there a vested interest, so to speak, of a homegrown industry and not warding people away from a domestic product that provided a lot of jobs?
Right.
Who knows? And you said differences between men and women. We mostly hear that women should drink less. Is that because we have more water or fat versus muscle with men?
It's body water.
It's body
We have
water.
less body water than men. They
Oh,
have
wow.
20% more. So, of course, if we drink a drink, it's going to be more concentrated.
Right.
So it'll have more effect on our liver. And there's been sort of reporting that breast cancer and drinking are affiliated. But
Hmm.
again, these are the same people that told me margarine was going to save the world. And that was perfect for people with high cholesterol. And it turned out that margarine was the worst thing you could possibly consume. So
Right.
you have to take it
Yeah.
all with a grain of salt.
It's almost like you have to take studies in moderation because it seems a conflicting study will come out. And as you know, the latest one says no level of alcohol is safe, which is just insane because it's like saying no level of driving is safe. How useful is that?
That's really probably true.
It is true.
I read that study, and what I did find out, I have a bunch of scientists that live around me, and I asked them questions about how they sampled it. And one of them pointed out to me that they didn't sample teetotalers in that study.
Oh,
So the teetotaler is actually somebody who is less healthy than the person who drinks 1 or drink a day. So if you put the teetotaler in there, it changes a little bit. But again, the answer that no level is safe is probably just the best answer they can give us because everything is self reported. When you
yeah,
go to the doctor, you say, oh, I only have 1 drink a day. Well, is it this full or is it this full?
right.
What exactly is 1 full glass to you? And all the different variables that make it very difficult for science to really research that in an authentic way. So it's probably like Michael Pollan said in The Omnivore's Dilemma: drink, enjoy a little, not a lot, and
Yes,
be smart about it. He said that about
exactly.
food: eat food a little bit every day, mostly vegetables.
Yep.
I heard one woman tell me, it was Ann Colgan of Colgan Cellars. She said, you know what,
Okay.
I just think I'd say keep the stress out of your life
Right.
and don't worry about whether you had 1 or 2 glasses. Reduce the
Absolutely.
stress.
Absolutely, because stress is a big killer too. And heart disease
Right.
is the number one killer, which we've heard wine can help with in terms of cardiovascular disease. And the other aspect of this whole health thing that you brought out in your article was wines, as you know, vary widely in alcoholic content, which in turn affects what is a unit or 1 glass of wine.
Right.
How does that interplay with the recommendations for moderation?
I think people, especially women, should pay attention to that. If you love big, powerful cabs, then you're probably drinking in 14.5 to 15.5 range. And that is significantly different than maybe a light bodied Pinot Noir or Pinot Grigio, which is going to be 13. And wine labels, this is tightened up a little bit in the US, but they do have some latitude in labeling. They don't have to put the exact precise percentage on there, they give or take a 0.5%. So if it's 15 and a half, maybe it's actually 16%. just bearing that in mind when you're enjoying. And my strategy is glass of water, glass of wine. I just try to
Yes.
match water and wine
Yep.
so that I'm not getting too carried away, but I'm having a good time and still enjoying my wine. And,
Absolutely.
life is here to be enjoyed,
Yes.
and wine is a big part of that.
Yeah, and I heard the quote, I'm not giving up wine for 5 extra years in the nursing home on a catheter.
Exactly.
It's like, really? That's what you're saving up for?
Yeah, I don't need the extra 6 months. If I'm 85, I'm good.
Exactly. Exactly. So just to wrap up that health topic, Katie, what did your doctor advise you to do?
I love my doctor. She's very real. She said, Katie, it's the 1, 2, 3. One a day, no more than two at a time, no more than 3 days a week. So she
Okay.
was like, take a couple days off.
Huh.
Enjoy your wine, but take a couple days off. That's
Interesting.
generally what I try to stick to. And I find when I take a couple days off, the wine tastes much better on that day that I come back to it.
That's true.
Let your palate kind of rest and have some sparkling water. And then it's super exciting when you get back to your
That's
wine
true. That's true.
on day 3 or whatever.
I remember my first glass of wine after my son was born and
Yes,
everything was over. It's like, wow, this is amazing.
entirely true. It's just
It
like a revelation. Very true.
was fantastic. All right. So let's turn from health now, Katie, to your next big topic that intrigued me, Robert Parker. So I think a lot of people are familiar, but not everybody necessarily. So tell us who Robert Parker is.
He is the publisher and founder of the Wine Advocate, which when he started it, and I think this is still true today, it was an ad-free publication of basically tasting notes and reviews of wine, completely unencumbered by ad dollars. He, I think, got his sort of moment of fame when I can't remember what Bordeaux vintage it was, but everybody had completely bagged the vintage. And Parker said, no, it's exceptional. Give it 5 years or give it whatever amount of time it needs. And he turned out to be right. So
Mhm.
since that time, he is really a high wattage star in the wine world. I mean, I think people consider him the golden palate.
Yes, he really turned the tide on wine reviewing and the scoring system of 100 points.
Yes.
Yeah, he really popularized that. He wasn't the only one using it, but as you said in your article, he really popularized it. And I think it was the 1982 vintage for Bordeaux. It was a warm one.
Yeah.
And so the wines were really ripe and not to the taste perhaps of European drinkers, but he loved them. And that's also where he gets the criticism of liking these, quote, fruit bombs. What's that all about?
I have great respect for him, but I think there are people, especially in the wine world, who feel that he very highly scores very powerful, concentrated, high alcohol, fruity, jammy wines. I don't think that's fair because I think he scores all kinds of wines and he gives them all a fair shake, but he seems to really love and appreciate those super duper high powered Napa cabs that you could stick a fork in.
Wow. Okay. You're balanced in your comments, but do you think he has influenced the styles of wines that are made? Are winemakers trying to please his palate?
I have to say, yes, I do. And I think that influence is abated, but 5, 8 years ago, his influence was profound. If he scored your wine highly, you did well. I mean, it's a business. People are
Yeah.
still trying to earn a living. And so they
Yeah.
were building wines that they wanted Mr. Parker to taste and hopefully rate highly. And then that's good for their name, their wine. It sells their wine, it gets their name out there. So I just think it would be hard to argue that he didn't influence, especially in Napa,
Right.
where I feel like that was the most profound influence. I don't read enough of his reviews to say that isn't true for all the other regions, but I think Napa for sure.
Yes, absolutely. And I think his rise to fame is also a function of just how difficult a product wine is to buy.
Yeah,
We can try on a dress, we can read the first chapter of a book in the store, but we can't taste the wine, at least not
right,
legally, right?
right.
So we're relying either on the label, fluffy squirrels, castles, or a score that's on there, right?
Absolutely.
So,
And we're not talking $5. Sometimes we're talking 50, five
right.
hundred. I mean, it's a commitment.
Yes.
I absolutely appreciate why people like the guidance. And that kind of wine, that high powered, intense wine, there are a lot of people that love that kind of wine. And
Yes.
there's nothing wrong with it. It's just a taste preference. There are people who make it and make it beautifully and make it very well, and it does the trick. So, no judgment. It's personal preference.
Yeah. And now you saw him at a wine writers
Yeah.
symposium in Napa. He was a speaker. What was your impression of him in the speech that he gave, his comments, that sort of thing?
Actually, he had just been recently through a surgery. maybe a back surgery. So he was extremely frail, and it was shocking, actually. This sort of lion of wine hobbled in, but, bless the man, he just had back surgery. So I can
Wow.
appreciate why he was feeling rough. He was very interesting, and he feels China is the underappreciated wine market, and that doing videos online and kind of reaching that huge audience over in the East is something that he says, if you want the opportunity in my book for the next Parker, if you will, is over there, is meeting those people's needs for information and knowledge and education. And that was really hammered home, that whole thing. This was 2 years ago, I think. So a lot has happened since then, but I still think he's maybe onto something.
Yeah, I was interested to hear his comments again in your article about the power of online video wine education,
Right.
which made me very happy because I offer a wine course. It's like, yoo-hoo. But, he's saying that there is a thirst literally
Yes.
for wine education. Not everybody can travel to a class at night, and not every town, city offers wine courses that we
Right.
take for granted in larger centers. But I was fascinated that he made that comment. All right. Now let's turn to oak. Not a hugely technical discussion, but again, I was fascinated with the angle that you took, Katie, in your story. You started your story in a French forest next to a 160-year-old oak tree. Why were you there, and what was the
So
story
I
about?
was in the Vosges forest
Yeah.
in France with Pierre Sayon. He's a winemaker in Bordeaux. He also makes Verite in Sonoma. And Pierre wanted me to come with him to the forest because he is very excited about these trees. And these are the trees that he likes to personally select to make his wine barrels.
Hmm.
I was deeply curious as to why any one tree would be different than any other for a wine barrel, and why it mattered so much to him that he actually would travel to the forest with the ecologist and the other individuals that are part of the team to pick these trees.
Wow. And you were saying it was quite delightful, your description. He's smelling the bark and he's really entranced with these trees.
He
Um,
did.
he's the son of a cork farmer, right? You were saying cork tree farmer?
Yeah, and he's Frenchman, but Pierre is just a man of the land. He was sniffing the bark. He was very like a beagle to me, very fascinated and curious with everything around him and admiring the spine of the tree. And, we're over here trying to sort of talk about what's going on, and we're trying to leave, and he's wandered off and we have to go find him. And he's like, "But have you seen this tree?" And, starting to rain, but he doesn't want to leave. He's just so enthralled with what I feel for him was the basis of good wine. I mean,
Oh,
obviously the vineyard is very, 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 very critical part of good wine, but so
sure.
is the oak you're going to put it in for 18 months.
And now some people call oak the ketchup of the wine world, like it hides flaws and so on. But he sort of sees oak as part of the terroir, that ambiguous French term of climate, soil, and other topography, winemaker choices. Why does he see oak as part of that whole terroir?
He views oak as an opportunity to give the wine something that he feels that it needs. So he's taking it down to the basic level. He's picking the tree. Then he's going to the cooperage, and he is overseeing the toast, the level of flame they put on it. He's overseeing how the staves are cut. And then he's looking at, okay, well, this particular tree's grain is very tight and this tree's grain is less so. So I'm going to age some in the tight grain and some in the less tight grain because the oxygen exchange will be different.
Huh,
At this point, it's so scientific, it's like a chemistry class for me. I can't even
right.
keep up with all the layers of detail that he's so married to. And then he vinifies every single lot separately in Bordeaux,
Oh,
and then he
wow.
puts them in different barrels to get exactly what he wants, and then he blends to get the taste he wants. How is this
Keeps it all
staying in your
straight.
head?
I know, exactly. And what does a tight grain in general do? Like if the grain is tight in the oak, is that going to be an oaky wine or a less oaky wine?
Well, I'm not 100% sure about that, but what it
Okay.
does, if it's tighter, it allows less oxygen through during the
Okay.
aging process. So that it
Okay.
does keep the wine in a different condition, like maybe a fresher condition than if it's a less tight grain.
Okay.
The more porous the grain, the more oxygen comes in and out of the barrel.
Right.
It impacts taste.
Yes, absolutely. And they call that the angel share, the stuff that
Yes,
evaporates in the winery.
exactly.
Happy angels.
Yeah. While he's standing in a rainy forest looking at a tree smelling bark. That's what he's
Wow.
thinking about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the history of forestry management in France was really interesting. You touched on that in your story. Why does France produce the most famous trees for cooperages, for barrels in the world?
I think it was Louis XIV started
Okay.
forestry to build trees to build his navy. I think it was all part of the French military, an infrastructure project. Some of those trees are 200 years old.
They're old and they had to be straight, right, for the staves of the ship, I
Right.
guess, or whatever they would have called them, the slats, but it's staves for a barrel, the sides.
And they can't be these big, fat, round, like here in the South, our 200-year-old oaks are these obese monsters. They're just huge. You would never use them to make a barrel. But in France, they're not very big. They're just super
Right.
tall. And the grain is so tight. I just think it takes them a really long time to grow. And so they tighten and they don't get wide and fat.
Wow. And so how do they toast them? They've got these open-ended barrels. The heads on either end, the top and the bottom are not there. They've got these staves. So how are they toasting these barrels?
When I was there, they were using like a propane torch
Oh,
and just doing it that way. But sometimes, like in a distillery, they send them through a big open flame. I mean, they're
okay.
charring them into black soot.
Wow.
The toast situation for a wine barrel is a much softer touch. So, sort of
Okay.
like when you toast your toast in the morning. I mean, how dark do
Yeah.
you want it?
Yeah. That sounds like creme brulee with the flame.
Exactly. Yes.
I visited Cooperage in France too, and they had little fires, just little mini campfires on the floor, and they were placing the barrels over them, and then they would take them off. But it looked very tribal. Let's talk more about your interest generally here, Katie. What's the best wine advice that you've ever received?
I think the best advice I've ever received is just enjoy your wine that you want to enjoy when you want to enjoy it. Don't feel married to the rules. Don't feel that the prescribed way you're supposed to drink it should overrule your enjoyment.
Right.
But a
Absolutely.
practical piece of wine advice that I got
Yes.
long ago from a really wonderful sommelier, and I've learned this since you start writing about wine and tasting wine. Don't drink warm red wine.
Mm.
If you don't have a cellar or temperature controlled refrigerator and you just keep your wine in the wine rack, refrigerate it 30 minutes, pull it out, it's the perfect temperature.
Oh, wow.
And down here in the South, where I know it's hot there today for you all, but here it's
Yeah.
90 to 100 degrees many
Okay.
months. That's the only, otherwise, warm red wine is an offensive. It takes all the things
It
about the
is.
wine and it amplifies the tannin and the alcohol. And so chill it
Absolutely.
first. And if you didn't think ahead, then take one ice cube and I put it in a Ziploc bag and I just
Huh.
dip it in my wine.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, we
A
go through a lot
Ziploc.
of Ziploc bags in this house, but yes.
That's great. I like that idea. So, if you could share a bottle of wine with anyone, living or dead, who would that be and which wine would it be?
What would be Domaine
Oh,
Romanée-Conti,
of
and
course.
I would have to share that with Thomas Jefferson because that was the wine region he loved, and he's a redhead like me, and he likes to read. He obviously read a lot of books, and he's a statesman and a politician, and I would absolutely love to sit down with him and just talk to him about everything related to wine and to democracy and
That's
humanity. I
lovely.
think he'd be fascinating.
He would be, wouldn't he?
Yeah,
All right. Do you have a most useful wine gadget that you've come across?
I love the champagne stopper. I'm a big fan because I love champagne.
Ah,
And it's nothing fancy.
okay.
It basically goes into your champagne and
Yeah.
then snap it shut, pour your glass because you're only allowed one glass a day, and you stick it right back in the door of your fridge and don't touch it until tomorrow. And if you do that, you can get your champagne to last for 3, sometimes 4 days. I've
Oh,
actually left for trips, forgotten I had a bottle in the fridge, and come home, and it's been fresh after 5 days.
that's amazing. Awesome. Well, that's great. Yeah, we should all have one of those or a couple. Katie, this has flown by, but is there anything we haven't covered that you'd like to talk about as we wrap up?
We've covered all the great fun stories that I personally have had. So,
You
yeah,
have
it's
so
been
many.
great. I've really enjoyed
Oh,
this.
awesome. That's terrific. And where can people find you online?
You can find me on Forbes. If you just Google Forbes, Katie Kelly Bell, I will pop up. Find me on USA Today. You can find me through Wine Enthusiast. I'm in there every now and then. And then Modern Luxury magazines, they're distributed in the US pretty widely. Almost every major city has a Modern Luxury publications.
Oh, wow. You are a busy lady. Thank you so much, Katie, for
Yeah, it was a
spending
real
some of your
pleasure.
time with us. Yeah, great
Yeah,
conversation.
thanks for
Would love
having
to
me.
talk with you again. I had to really pare it down because you had so many great columns under Forbes. So, anyway, thanks again and
Sure.
good luck with your travels and your projects and your stories that are on the go now. And we'll say goodbye for now.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Katie.
Bye.
Bye bye. Wasn't that a terrific discussion? So here are my takeaways. Number one, in wine, as with the rest of the world, the greater the achievement, the humbler the creator. Aubert de Villaine is case in point. Number 2, you can get a much firmer understanding of a wine region by actually visiting it, especially when that region is as confusing and subdividing as Burgundy is. Number 3, when it comes to wine in moderation, adapt Michael Pollan's approach to food. Drink wine, not too much. And I'd add, mostly Pinot. Number 4, Robert Parker Jr. is and has been one of the most powerful wine critics in the world whose influence can affect wine prices. However, the internet and social media have done much to diffuse that influence. Number 5, I love that Robert Parker believes that the future of wine is in online wine classes. I'm all in. And number 6, oak aging in wine has a long and storied past and can be used for both good and evil when it comes to making wine. Good being adding an extra nuance to the taste of wine, and bad being covering up winemaking mistakes with too much of it. So, what was your favorite tip or quote from this episode? Please share that with me on Twitter or Facebook and tag me at Natalie McLean. On Instagram, I'm at Natalie McLean Wine, or use the hashtag Unreserved Wine Talk. You'll find links to the social media channels for Katie, reviews of all the wines we discussed, and bonus tips for this episode at nataliemclain.com/11. My next guest on this show will be another Forbes wine columnist, Kathy Hoya, and we'll be chatting about wine and women in the lead up to the International Women's Day. Finally, if you want to take your ability to pair wine and food to the next level, join me in a free online wine video class at nataliemclain.com/class. You don't want to miss one juicy episode of this podcast, especially the secret, full-bodied bonus episodes that I don't announce on social media. So, subscribe for free now at nataliemclain.com/subscribe. Meet me here next week. Cheers.